Good evening. Welcome to everyone. So nice to be able to host more and more events here on campus. Great to have you here this evening. I am Father John McGarry, the president of Jesuit High School. Welcome to all of you who are sitting here in the chapel. And you see we are live streaming this event on our YouTube channel, I believe. We have a YouTube channel. Did you know that? I didn't know that till today. But we're very welcome to all of you who are joining us virtually as well. You are here this evening for the third annual President's Lecture. And many of you know I was principal here from 1998 to 2005. And when I came back as president in 2018, one of our veteran esteemed faculty members, Mr. Ed Trafton, known to many of you I'm sure, said to me, you know, one of the things you should start is an annual public lecture on some aspect of Jesuit education, Jesuit Ignatian spirituality, gospel living, our life in the church, the ministry of the church, however you want to say it, some opportunity for us to come together as members of the broader Jesuit High School community, parents of our current students, some of whom are here this evening, alumni parents, benefactors, and friends of the school. So I took Mr. Trafton's suggestion, and so this is our third annual President's Lecture. The first year, pre-COVID, remember those days? We had Father Fred Kammer, a Jesuit priest who works at the Poverty Law Institute in New Orleans, Louisiana, part of Loyola University there. He spoke to us on economic justice and Jesuit education and Ignatian spirituality. Last year on Zoom, perhaps some of you participated, we had Father Tom Lucas, who is the current pastor of St. Ignatius Parish here in Sacramento, a former professor at both the University of San Francisco and Seattle University, and he spoke to us in his area of expertise, which is Jesuit history and art. This evening, we are blessed to have Father Greg Boyle with us. He is the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, my native city, the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and re-entry program in the world. Born and raised in Los Angeles and a Jesuit priest, from 1986 to 1992, Father Boyle served as pastor of Dolores Mission Church in Boyle Heights in East Los Angeles. Dolores Mission was the poorest Catholic parish in Los Angeles, and it also had the highest concentration of gang activity in the city. Father Boyle witnessed the devastating impact of gang violence on his community during the so-called Decade of Death that began in the late 1980s and peaked at 1,000 gang-related killings in 1992. In the face of law enforcement tactics and criminal justice policies of suppression and mass incarceration as the means to end gang violence, Father Greg and his parishioners and the community members adopted what was a radical approach at the time: treat gang members as human beings. In 1988, they started what would eventually become Homeboy Industries, which employs and trains former gang members in a range of social enterprises, as well as provides critical services to thousands of men and women who walk through its doors every year seeking a better life. Father Boyle is the author of the 2010 New York Times bestseller, Tattoos on the Heart, which many of our students have read. I'm sure many of you have also read it. His second book, that's the subtitle of Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion. His second book, Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship, was published in 2017. And his new book, his third book, which will be the focus of his reflections with us this evening, The Whole Language, The Power of Extravagant Tenderness, that came out in fall of 2021. Father Boyle has received the California Peace Prize and has been inducted into the California Hall of Fame. In 2014, President Obama named Father Boyle a champion of change. He received the University of Notre Dame's 2017 Laetare Medal, the oldest honor given to American Catholics. In 2020, Father Boyle served as a committee member of the California Governor Gavin Newsom's Economic and Job Recovery Task Force as a response to the COVID-19 crisis. In the same year, Homeboy Industries was the recipient of the 2020 Hilton Humanitarian Prize, validating 32 years of Father Greg Boyle's vision and work by the organization for over 3 decades. His greatest achievement, however, has to be that he taught me when I was a high school student at Loyola High School in Los Angeles, in my junior year, creative writing. Now, he's not that much older than I am, so that means we were both very young at the time. Not only that, he directed my senior retreat, and he was very influential and continues to be influential in my vocation as a Jesuit and a priest. Please join me in welcoming Father Greg Boyle.
Okay, well, there goes my opening line about teaching John McGarry. And, I had it all kind of crafted in my head, and oh well, you killed it. It's Fred Kammerer and Tom Lucas, and who those are two giants of the Society of Jesus who actually know something, who preceded me in the lecture. So I'm an expert on nothing. But thank you for inviting me nonetheless. Speaking of YouTube, it's kind of the bane of my existence because people, have seen me before, and it happens. I remember I was speaking at a foster grandparent gathering in Orange County, and I had spoken at the exact same gathering the summer before, and I don't know why they invited me 2 summers in a row, but there you have it. And so I gave the same, basically, more or less the same talk, and afterwards I see this foster grandmother who walks up to me, and she has big tears in her eyes, and I think she liked the talk, and she grabbed both my hands and she said, "I heard you last year. It never gets better." So kind of hoping she misspoke there. So, well, here's why I think you're here tonight and watching at home with this enormously bright light under which you could keep French fries warm, I'm sure. It has nothing to do with me. It's about wanting to find ourselves anchored all over again in a vision, and how are we to imagine our world and what we hope to have happen in it. And so we have a vision that we want to align with the God who loves us without measure and without regret. What St. Ignatius says, the God who's always greater. How do we align what we want to see happen with that God? And so we hear Jesus say that you may be one. And then we know that the invitation is about union with each other. This is God's dream come true. And so we want to create and roll up our sleeves to make happen a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. We want to foster such a community of beloved belonging. And we want to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. We want to seek together to dismantle the barriers that exclude so that the kinship of God can become real To that end, all of us in our way, in our own particularity, we want to stand at the margins because that's the only way they'll ever get erased. And we put ourselves out there, and we stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. We stand with those whose dignity has been denied. We stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. We stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and we stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. We know that God's dream come true is kinship. And we also know that no kinship, no peace, no kinship, no justice, no kinship, no equality, no matter how singularly focused we may well be on those goals. They can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we belong to each other, that we are connected, that there is no daylight that separates us. There is no us and them, there's only us. And we inch our way out to the margins, and we brace ourselves because we fully anticipate the world will accuse us of wasting our time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." So we inch our way out to the margins and other voices get heard. Well, everything I've just said to you doesn't make a lick of sense unless we're anchored in the God who is spacious and expansive and wildly in love with us. St. Ignatius of Loyola says, "Take care to keep always before your eyes first God." It seems sort of obvious, but it's kind of anchor. It's the center. The mystery of the ministry of Jesus was that God was at the center of it. The mystic and theologian Meister Eckhart says, "It is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you." And we can hear that, and I think we can be consoled by it, and I think we can think, no, that our God is wagging his finger or shaking his head or saying that we're not quite measuring up yet. Richard Rohr, a theologian, says, yeah, it's true that we're all created in the image and likeness of God, but it's also true that our image of God creates us. And so if our image and notion is puny and tiny, then we should not be surprised if that's how we operate in the world. If our God is large and expansive, then chances are we will gravitate toward exactly that, and we will be the same in the world, generous and spacious and expansive. I had a spiritual director many years ago who said, we need a better God than the one we have. He was a Jesuit. But we all know that he's right. We settled for a partial God, and we ought not to. We should hold out for the God we actually have. This is the God of love, and this is the God that Jesus knew. I was saying Mass, we all keep saying this thing pre-pandemic, but it was pre-pandemic. I was saying Mass at a juvenile hall, San Fernando Juvenile Hall, and there were like 500 kids there, mainly gang members, and folding chairs, and I was up on kind of a raised platform, and I had my alb and my stole on, and there was, the sheet that they hand out that has the readings in English and in Spanish, and the homies would come up to the podium over there, and I was sitting in my presider's chair, which was a folding chair, and they would get up and do the first reading, etc. And so presiders do this every once in a while. We say, I'm just going to close my eyes. I'm going to listen to the word proclaimed. And so the first guy got up and did the first reading. Then the second guy came up to do the responsorial psalm. And there was a kind of an overabundance of confidence in his voice. And he gets up and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I said, "What the hell?" And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking immediately, wow, that's way better. Because everybody can connect to exhaustion. If your parents or grandparents, like say a grandparent, "What'd you do this week?" "Oh, I had the grandkids for the whole weekend. I'm exhausted." But it's a good tired, and you know exactly what it is. It's a good tired, because you were out of yourself. You were experiencing yourself in a palpable way, and your true self in loving. You were exhausted. And if you imagine God doing that, then we're getting close to the God we actually have. My friend Mirabai Starr, who's a mystic and writes about mystics, she translates John of the Cross and a bunch of Teresa and all these people. And she says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. And I think that's true, or at least it ought to happen. Some woman who read my recent book, and I guess maybe I quote Rumi, who's a Persian poet, a lot, and I like him. And she sent me this new book about him, and so I've been reading it. And at one point he says, love is God's religion. And I think every human being with a pulse says, yeah, that's right. Love is God's religion. And loving is how we practice it. And I think that's exactly right. Privilege of my life to know John McGarry and to teach him as a junior at Loyola High. He buried his mother, who was a magnificent human being, not that long ago, and I did as well. And they were friends, our moms. But my mom died, I don't know, it was like 2017 or 18, can't even remember now. But and she died the way you would want to die. In your own bed, in your own home, surrounded by your kids. She had 8 kids and a slew of grandkids. And she was, sharp as a tack, even to the end. In fact, the last year of her life, she watched so much MSNBC, she was becoming Rachel Maddow. So, and she was not a lick afraid of dying. In fact, 2 months before she died, she said to me with enormous exhilaration, "I've never done this before," which was something you exactly say just as you dive out of the plane with the parachute for the very first time. I've never done this before. In fact, the day before she died, I was sitting at the front of her bed, at the foot of her bed, and this never happened. I was alone. There's usually a bunch of people around her bed, but it was just the two of us. She was asleep. And she opened her eyes and she looked at me and she went, "Oh, for crying out loud." And she closed her eyes again. Well, she was pissed, that she wasn't dead, Sorry. Well, the next day, again, my sisters went out to get lunch or something to bring back, and again, I was the only one there. And it was exactly noon, and she opened her eyes, and she lifted her head a little bit, and she let out this wondrous, glorious gasp. skydiving. And she left us. And nobody in earshot of that sound could ever be afraid of death again. But I remember that in the last days, there'd be 2 or 4 or all 8 of her kids around her bed, and she would be out. But when she would come to, she would lock onto just one of us, and she would say with breathless delight, "You're here, you're here." And I remembered that as we buried her. And I thought, that may well be the single solitary agenda of the God we actually have, to look at us with breathless delight and say, "You're here, you're here." We're what are we, 2 weeks from Ash Wednesday, more or less? And in Lent, and we think of Jesus, the 40 days in the desert. Lent always reminds me of Michelle, who was a homegirl, tough cookie, who came into my office one day and she said, "Well, it's official." I said, "What?" "I just found out my man's been cheating on me." "Oh, gosh." I just went to church, got me them ashes, gave his ass up for Lent. Now, I'll admit that has nothing to do with anything, but it's my favorite Lenten story. But, we conjure up this image of Jesus in the desert, 40 days and growling stomach and dark night of the soul and sort of plagued with, doubt. Jesus thinking, should I have given up chocolate and scotch, for Lent and whatever it is, And yet I suspect that all it was God looking at Jesus with breathless delight and saying, "You're here, you're here." And Jesus saying right back, "You're here, you're here." And suddenly we're all resting in the stillness of God, in the stillness of love. We receive the tender glance, and then we choose to be that tender glance in the world. I think that's the whole thing. Take care to keep always before your eyes first God, which is to say, the tender glance. And that's the hope. Not that we will say things about God, but that we will choose to be in the world who God is, tender, compassionate, loving kindness. And that's the hope. So John kind of mentioned, the birth of Homeboy and sort of the Cliff Notes version of that is that I was assigned as pastor of the poorest parish in the city, and it was in Los Angeles, and it was nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village, which at the time was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. And we had 8 gangs at war with each other, which led the LAPD to deem my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in the city. So if LA was the gang capital of the world, my parish was the gang capital of Los Angeles. So I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. I buried my 254th 2 weeks ago, a 14-year-old kid named Jeremy. His uncle works at Homeboy. And so in those, and not all those deaths are from that parish, obviously, but I know a lot of gang members. I get asked to do this. And so we did a lot of things. First thing we did was we started a school because there were so many junior high, middle school age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them, so they were wreaking havoc in the projects during the day, writing on the walls and selling drugs, and they were violent. So I can remember walking out to them, and I would kind of, isolate them. I'd say, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so that kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church is our parochial school, grades K to 8. So our elementary school occupied the first 2 floors of this enormous building. But the entire 3rd floor was the convent. And so one evening I gathered all the nuns. There were like 8 Belgian nuns, and I sat them down in their living room. I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out? And we could turn the convent, into a school for gang members. And I remember they turned and looked at each other and they went, sure. Literally, that's what happened. And that was the extent, the entirety of their discernment process. And so we were off and running. And so this brought gang members from all 8 gangs to the parish, which made it a really hard place. I'd have many teachers who lasted exactly a week, and once I had a principal who lasted exactly 1 day. When I tried to call him the next day, hello, are you coming back? He had changed his number, went into some witness protection program of some kind. But the main issue was, parishioners would sidle up to me and they would kind of say, wow, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed, good people in and bad people out, which I thought was a pretty good gospel challenge. And then the gang members in short order said if only we had jobs, and so myself and the women, and the parish profile was women with children. There weren't that many men, actually. So myself and the women, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we just started stuff. We started a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of members of these rival gangs. And then it'll be 30 years, in 1992, I guess, April, was the unrest that followed the Rodney King verdict, the acquittal of the 4 police officers in Simi Valley. And every pocket of poverty just ignited, except the poorest pocket, Dolores Mission, didn't. And so the Los Angeles Times sent a reporter, and they wanted to find out why that was the case. And I said, well, I don't know, but maybe it had something to do with the fact that there were 60 strategically hired rival enemy gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and the reason, more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. So the next day the article appeared and was read by a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million. And so he summoned me to his Beverly Hills office, and he said, so how do you think I should spend my money? And I look back on it now, I see that I woefully undershot my request, but I was young, I had hair. So I said, well, there, across the street from the school is an abandoned bakery. You could buy it. It has ovens. They don't work, but you could fix them. I don't know. We could put hairnets on rival gang members. They could bake bread. We could call it Homeboy Bakery. That was the entirety of my business plan. And he said, sure. And again, we were off and running. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for Future, which we had previously called ourselves, to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved here. And not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. But nobody ever plans to do anything like this. Everything evolves. You're responding to things. You back your way into things. And now 4 years later, we are the largest gang intervention, rehab, reentry program on the planet. So 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors wanting to reimagine their lives. We don't exist for those who need help. We're only there for those who want it. And so you have to walk through the door. Everyone who walks through the door, man and woman, they come barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. Each one comes through those doors. We call it the magic of the swinging doors. Each one walks through those doors with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. If it's true, and I believe it is, that the traumatized will be likely to find their way to causing trauma, it's equally true that the cherished will find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and each other. I was thinking the other day, systems change when people do. And people change when they are cherished. Which makes it absolutely essential to receive the tender glance from the God who can't take his eyes off of us. And then to become that tender glance in the world, to cherish with every breath you take. It's not a once and for all decision, but it is how you choose with every breath you take. And so we have this 18-month program, which years later we asked ourselves, people were saying, why 18 months? And I know at the time we said, well, 1 year is too short, 2 years is too long. How about 18 months? But later on, we remembered that 18 months is the amount of time it takes for an infant to attach to the caregiver. And we said, okay, kind of after the fact, we said, that makes sense to us. And every single man and woman who walks through our doors is an anthem to resilience. And they find the place to be something of a sanctuary, and then they become the sanctuary that they sought. And then they go home and they provide that sanctuary to their kids, and suddenly you've broken a chain. You've upset a pattern. And that's the way it ought to work. At Homeboy, we're kind of allergic to the notion of holding the bar up and asking folks to measure up. We don't do it because our exhausted God never does it. Why would we? Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth, that they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And then you watch them as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But you have to reach in and you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. The great scripture scholar Marcus Borg, who died too young, used to say that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout Scripture is shame and disgrace, and I think that's quite right. In the Acts of the Apostles, they have this very odd line, and it says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." And it suggests that the measure of health in any community, including this one here, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. I was reading this, somebody had sent me an article, and it was about Ignatius. And I have to admit, I didn't know this, and I'm 50 years a Jesuit, but I didn't know this. And it talked about on February 27th, 1544, Ignatius made this entry in his spiritual journal. And he mentions a word that he mentions a lot from that moment forward and for the 12 years that remained until he died. In fact, he even went back and he circled this word. And I speak Spanish, and I have to admit I've never even heard of this word. And this is the word. How's that for a buildup? The word is Acatamiento. Acatamiento. I had never heard of it before as an idea. And it comes from the word meaning to look at something with attention. Acatamiento. It gets translated as affectionate awe. And then people would mistranslate it as reverencia, as reverence, but Ignatius uses the word reverence. It's something different. Acatamiento, affectionate awe. And our health may well reside in our ability to stand with affectionate awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than in judgment. So a number of years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And it's what we call in the biz a gang in-service. So social workers commandeer a hotel ballroom from 9 to 5, and you sign in and you check in and you get credits. And they'll have keynotes and workshops and breakout sessions. And had done many of those. And figuring, I'll probably do a keynote or something, I said, sure, and I bought my ticket. Well, a week before I was to fly, I pull out the original letter inviting me, and to my horror, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And I remember, as the homies often say, I said to myself, oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker. So I invite 2 homies in who were in their 9th month or so of their 18 months. Andre, an African-American gang member, and Jose, and the two of them were from rival gangs. I sit him down, I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I had never heard their stories before, and Jose gets up first, and he just texted me today. He's a sweetheart. He's moved on from Homeboy, but he gets up in front of 600 social workers. He's 25 years old, tattooed, been to prison. At that juncture, he had become a very valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. And now he was helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. And so not only had he been to prison and very much in the gang life, and then he was also had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And so he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when my mom looked at me and said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasped. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. I've never seen that happen where we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage, and she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through. And second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. Affectionate awe. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. We all want to just take seriously what Jesus took seriously. Jesus knew the God of love, so he fired all the other gods. He did not believe in a puny, exacting, judgmental, quick to anger God. He believed in the God who simply said, "You're here," and only had breathless delight when he said it. We want to take seriously what Jesus took seriously, which are only 4 things. They're big things, but only 4. Inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. In the spiritual exercises of Ignatius, in a meditation, Ignatius calls the 2 standards, and it says simply, see Jesus standing in the lowly place. Jesus is not pointing to the lowly place and telling you to get over there. He's standing in the lowly place. He's not even inviting you to join him in the lowly place. He's just standing in the lowly place. And before you know it, you discover that he's standing there because that's where the joy is. And that's the hope that Jesus has for us. My joy, yours, your joy complete. And so we do join him in the lowly place so that margins can get erased. We think it's about grim duty and being invited to do the hard thing, but the hard thing is just the hard thing. It's not better. Do the joyful thing, the thing that allows you to be the tenderness of God in the world. Jesus didn't really say, if you want to go to heaven, do this. Instead, he said, do this, heaven. Stand in the lowly place. Take seriously what Jesus took seriously. As I told some of your sons this afternoon, that you stand with the widow, orphan, and stranger, and you allow them to shape you and alter your heart. And God picks these 3 subgroupings of the poor out for our attention, for our Acatamiento, because God thinks these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they have suffered in exactly this way, God thinks these are the very ones who happen to be our trustworthy guides to lead the rest of us to the kinship of God. It's our school of tenderness to somehow receive the tender glance and to choose to be that tenderness in the world. You know, I'm going to bring this to a semi-close and then open it up for some questions. But, you know, years ago, I don't know how I got an invitation like this, but it was to speak on a Sunday in one of those mega churches with the big jumbotrons behind me. It was just a huge arena with, I don't know what they were thinking, inviting me to this. But I said, well, what do you want me to do, you know? And said, well, just talk for 40 minutes. And so I did. And it was a utterly unique experience for me, and one that I've never had again. But afterwards, a woman cornered me, and she goes, well, your stories are all well and good, you know, when somebody begins with that. And she says, the only question worth asking is, do you bring gang members to Christ? I said, no, ma'am. They bring me to Christ. you don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. But she wasn't done yet. So she said to me, the only question is, do you worship God at Homeboy Industries? And I said, yeah, every damn day. And I don't think she liked that answer very much. But it begs the question, what kind of praise does our exhausted God have any interest in? So years ago, I was invited to my alma mater, Gonzaga University in Spokane, because like the sophomores here at Jesuit High, their incoming freshmen were forced to read tattoos on the heart against their will. So I felt I owed it to them to go. And they asked me to bring 2 homies, and I always bring homies when they ask. And I didn't this trip only because I have multiple stops and it was too complicated. And I always pick homies from enemy neighborhoods, and I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. And I've done this so many times, And so I picked, who did I pick? I picked Larry, African-American gang member, and Mario. And I'm used to homies being a little bit nervous and, but I've never seen anybody like this guy, Mario. I mean, he was, good Lord Almighty, he was so terrified of flying. And it was starting to freak me out a little bit. And he was, hyperventilating, which I'd never seen before, and we hadn't even boarded the plane yet. And so we were at, Burbank Airport, which is a very small airport, Southwest Airlines, big planes, but, and you don't have that hermetically sealed chute to board the plane. You walk out onto the tarmac like you're the president, and you climb up the steps to board the plane at the front, and the added feature are the steps at the back of the plane. I'm sitting there with Mario, and Larry's off walking somewhere, and our flight crew arrives, and there are 2 flight attendants, females. Both of them have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and it's early morning, and they're schlepping up the steps. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, well, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. And so I should tell you that in the history of Homeboy, Mario probably wins the prize of the most tattoos of anyone, which, trust me, if you've ever been to Homeboy, that is saying something. And he's all sleeved out all the way down to his fingertips. His neck is blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, eyelids that say the end, so that, when he's lying in his coffin, there will be no doubt for anybody. And so I'm trying to calm him down any way I can think. And so we're walking through the airport, and people are like this, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely. And I'm going, oh, wow, it's his tattoos. And I'd never been in public with him. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because if you were to go to Homeboy and just say, who's the kindest, most gentle soul here? Without taking a breath, they'd say Mario. Mario is the shape of God's heart. He ventilates the world with tenderness, with every breath he takes, though the packaging might suggest otherwise. So we get to Gonzaga, and there's the big Tuesday night, a couple thousand people, a huge place. And but what they don't tell you, of course, ever, is that you have all these classes they want you to go to, So I tell Mario and Larry, I said, look, I'm not going to speak in any of these classes. You get up and talk. And Mario was really nervous to do it, but they did a good job, honest to God. Stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse and abandonment. And if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. I wouldn't have survived a single day of their childhoods. So before my talk with the arena, with a couple thousand people, I said, you guys get up there, do a little 7 minutes each, so that when we have the Q&A, they can ask you questions. And oh my God, they're terrified. Mario was out of his skin. He was so terrified. But again, they did a good job. They were genuine. And I got up and did my thing. And so then I invite them up, and they're on either side of me. Yeah, what questions? Yes, ma'am. And a woman stands. She goes, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. And Mario is this tall, skinny drink of water, and he's stands at the microphone. He clutches it desperately, and he says, yes. And the woman says, well, Mario, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter, and they're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? What advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes, and he clutches the microphone with great intensity, and I can sense he's starting to tremble, and he's getting a friggin' hernia trying to come up with whatever the answer is he wants. And suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his microphone clutching refuge. And now he's trembling all the more, and I know he's losing his battle with his tears, but he wants to get the whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry. Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And a couple thousand total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And everybody standing had been returned to themselves. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. We receive the tender glance, and then we choose to be that tender glance in the world. We hear God say only one thing to us with breathless delight: you're here, you're here. And then we turn and we greet others with the same breathless delight. Acatamiento, affectionate awe, loving attention. It's the only praise there is. And then we know that as Jesus stands in the lowly place. We don't want to be anywhere else because we know that's where the joy is. And soon enough, we cease to care if anyone accuses us of wasting our time at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you very much. So, thank you. Well, this is so past my bedtime, I don't even know how to tell you about it, but we'll just do a couple, 10 minutes or something, and just go like this. I'll go like that. I'll repeat the question for the folks at home. And it should be painless, and there's no mic. We're not going to run out to a microphone. Just go like this, holler something out. 2, 3 questions. I'll give long-ass answers to them, and we'll be good for the evening. Yes?
If you could have that conversation repeated with that executive with $500 million, what would you ask of them today?
Okay, what would I ask of poor old Ray Stark, who's long dead, but who had the $500 million? What would I ask for today? I don't know. I don't really think in those terms. You know, our next frontier is we're going to start kind of build housing, because 70% of our population are, by the federal standard, homeless. So they're couch surfing, they're living in their cars. So that kind of thing. So we're about to do that, I think, expand our campus. But, you know, there was a huge movement to get the Board of Supervisors in LA not to rebuild Men's Central Jail, which was huge. So they're going to tear it down. And so we'd like to fill the void. You know, what if we were to imagine a different way of doing this? So we've conceived this thing called Hope Village that would kind of respond to what this really is. You know, for example, the largest mental institution on the planet Earth is LA County Jail. So that's telling us something. And then what if we did something differently? What if we chose not to punish wound, but to heal it? And healing is kind of the central thing of Homeboy at this point. And so if you don't transform your pain, you're just going to keep transmitting it. And so we want to create a culture that's indeed different from prisons. So we want to imagine a society without prisons and then roll up our sleeves to make that happen. So it's kind of exciting because there's this huge kind of area from LA Men's Central Jail, which is very walking distance to Homeboy, and a lot of vacant lots, and so we're in conversations with people. So I suppose if Ray Stark were alive, that's what I would ask him, probably. Fund the whole thing. You can't take it with you, which I think he discovered. Yeah. Yeah, so it comes from a story about the light switch. A kid named Lulu who was selling crack cocaine, and then he became his own best customer. And so I took him to a rehab. Anyway, I'm cutting the story short, but I had to go pick him up 30 days in because his younger brother, Eric, had done what gang members don't do. He put a gun to his head and he killed himself. they're more likely to walk into harm's way and hope to die, but they're never that direct ever. And so I picked him up at this rehab. He had only been there 30 days. And I said, I'm going to take you to your brother's funeral, but I'm going to drive you right back. He goes, I want to come back. I like how recovery feels, he said. And then as I picked him up and we were driving this great distance from the rehab to Los Angeles, he said that he had a dream. And in the dream, let's say a room this size, but pitch black, no illuminated exit signs, no light whatsoever, no light creeping under the doors. He says he knows that I'm there, but we're not speaking to each other. Until in the silence and in the darkness, I reach into my pocket and I have a flashlight, and I don't move, but I turn the flashlight on the light switch on the wall, and I hold it steadily, and he says, I know I'm the only one who can turn that light switch on. I'm glad you have a flashlight. So he walks with great trepidation following the beam of light. He gets to the light switch. He takes out a big old sigh and he flips the light switch on, and now he's sobbing in the telling of the story. And he says, the light is better than the darkness. Like he didn't know that to be the case. So I always tell that story about burnout, that you burn out if you try to turn the light switch on for somebody. And that changed my life in an instant. I've never had a thing in my life like that moment where I went, I've been doing it wrong. I was 10 years in probably. And I was trying to save, rescue, fix. I was trying to turn the light switch on for people. And so I always tell social workers and teachers, et cetera, that, you own a flashlight. You know where to aim it. That has to be enough for you. Otherwise you burn out because it's about you. It can't be about you. Jesuit High students have the best damn questions. That's all there is to it. So mature, beyond your years. How about one last one, just because, yeah. Go ahead and maybe just lower your mask a second. I'll repeat your question. Yeah. That's an excellent question. So the question about going out to the margins and the fear you have as you do that. And fear is born of just what's unknown. I don't even want to say it's born of ignorance, because that's too harsh a word. But what we don't know, will produce some fear within us, but the truth is we're all born wanting the same things. Every single person. And we're human beings, so that means we all share the same last name. Beings. And the more we can, Mother Teresa says the problem in the world is that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And so how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we, and it's kind of, they say look before you leap, but leap. You kind of have to dive in. And employers used to be like this a lot in our early days. I'd give a talk hoping that I'd find one employer in the group, and almost always I did, And they'd say, well, I'm nervous about this. All right, send me somebody. And then you just look at your watch, and it's only a matter of time that they call, oh my God, this kid is great. He's so eager, he's so polite, he's He's so respectful, all that kind of stuff, which all things were surprising to this employer because you had built up such a notion. But, you know, Brian Stevenson, what's the name of his book? Just Mercy, yeah. He talks about vicinity. You have to put yourself out, or you have to be proximate. And there's no way around proximity or vicinity or jurisdiction. You've got to enter into that other place. But you do it with humility. The students here, do service, and I know it's been altered because of the pandemic, but I know at Loyola High, every January we get 3 or 4 seniors who don't go to school. They just do the service, and they always ask the same question. It's like clockwork. They always say, what are we going to do here? And I always say, no, that's the wrong question. What's going to happen to you here, And then it's all relational, because it's only the relationship that heals. And so you dive in, you look before you leap, but you leap. And you recognize in short order that we were all born wanting the same things. And some folks were dealt really difficult hands. And so, like Ignatius, who moved from this mystical moment, an individual experience, to this mystical consciousness, it changed the way he saw, which is why he went back and circled this word, Acatamiento, because it was, that's what it is. It's affectionate awe, not just in contemplating the Trinity, but it was how he chose to be in the world, to greet people with breathless delight and to stand in affectionate awe at what the poor and those we are frightened of have to carry. And then it's a unifying thing, which is God's dream come true. Thank you all for coming out here tonight.
Thank you so much, Greg, for inspiring us, expanding our hearts and our vision, and giving us hope that we can certainly trust in God's loving and tender mercy, and we can share that generously with each other. Thank you so much for being here this evening, for joining us for this annual President's Lecture. I don't know who I'm going to invite next year. If you have any suggestions, let me know. I'm running out of my friends that I invite to come and give these talks. So, but of course, we will do this again next year. We're delighted that you're here. We couldn't give you the refreshments earlier because we're in the chapel, but there are refreshments for you on the way out. Water and cookies, likely because of COVID. They're wrapped up, but please enjoy yourselves. Take a refreshment with you. Stay around and visit outside where you don't have to wear the mask. We're in a school, so we're still wearing masks here, unfortunately. Someday soon, we'll get past that. But thank you for coming. Please enjoy refreshments in the lobby. God bless you. Thank you.